Everybody, my name is Peter McBride. Welcome to 41 Club Connects with Moongazer beers, and I shall be in a short while introducing National President Peter Good, who will say a few words, and then we will progress in with the evening. Just a quick couple of rules. We'll keep people on mute for most of the time. If you need to unmute and say something, fine. Can you please put all questions in the chat, the Zoom chat? Those questions will be picked up by the co-hosts and by the speaker, David, from Moongazer Ales, Moongazer Beers. So I think that's about it. Hopefully everybody, we have 70 people joining us this evening. So looking forward to a really good evening. And unless anybody has any major issues with just technology, I think we're okay. Peter, National President Peter, can I pass over to you, please, to start the evening?
Yeah, thanks very much, Peter. Great to see all you guys coming on tonight. It's fantastic. Nothing too serious tonight. This is more of a social event, so I'm not going to ramble on too much. And straight over to Kelly, who will introduce the speaker tonight, and we'll get tasting these lovely beers. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, gents. I'm pleased to introduce to you David from Moongazer Beers, otherwise known as Norfolk Brew House. He's going to talk to us about the beers, a bit of history about them, some of the brewing, and everything else that goes with them. It's going to be good, light-hearted fun. For those of you who have bought it, he'll give you the running order of the beers that we've got to sample as well. So straight over to David.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Peters, for having us along, and thanks for all joining us. You know, it's going to be a different evening. Normally, when we do these tastings, we're in a freezing cold brewery and all hands on and decks and face to face. But it's the first Zoom one I've done, but I'm looking forward to it. We're going to talk about 3 beers today, but I'll also, as we go through, tell you a little bit about our brewery. I'll tell you a little bit about how we brew and brewing history. So don't want to teach anyone to suck eggs. So if there's any brewers out there, don't pick me up if I make mistakes. But, you know, we'll just try and keep it interesting and tell you a little bit about the history of the beers and the history of the malts and the hops and the ingredients we use. So hopefully you'll have some fun tasting the beers, but equally you'll learn a bit as we go. I do like answering questions. So, you know, if I get stuck, I'll just say I haven't got a bloody clue. But do put them into the chat. And as I'm chatting through, I'll try and read them and share them with them, because the more we can get out of this, the better for everyone, really, to find things that we do. And as you can imagine, in brewing at the moment, it's pretty tricky times with 80% of our market effectively closed, with the pubs and hotels and everything either been shut or in tier 2. But we soldier on. We've had a tough year, but we're still here, and we will still be here in 2021. So let's drink to the beer. So 3 beers that we're going to chat to you tonight about. The order that we're going to do them, if you've got them, is going to be the Moongazer Whiteface IPA, which is the golden hoppy one. So if you haven't bought the beers and you've got other beers, anything golden or anything hoppy that you've got, we can chat through. Beer number 2 will be the Bouchard, which is the mild. And then beer number 3 is the number 1 Norfolk Ale, which is the one we do with Michelin chef Galton Blackiston, which we'll come on to that. So if you want to open your beers, or if you've got them there steady, we'll start with the Whiteface. So in case any of you are wondering about the names, by the way, our brewery was started with Rachel, my wife, and myself in 2012. So this is our 8th year of going. About 8 years ago, Rachel wanted a conservatory, I wanted a brewery, and I won the vote. And we're just trying to make enough money now to buy the conservatory, which is, like I say, pretty tough in this time of year. But it was a bit of a midlife crisis, but something we wanted to do. We both worked hard. Rachel's worked at Norwich City Council in the civic office in the communications department. I'd spent a life in sort of marketing beer and working with pub companies and such like. So you know, I'd spent a lot of my time looking at beers, looking at breweries, and seeing that they were having a better life than I was. Little did I know that jumping ship and joining their side, you know, never worked so hard before in my life for so little money. But you know, every day I go home with a smile on my face. So it's something that I've really enjoyed doing and still enjoy doing to this day. But it's all quite challenging, but good fun. And we kind of have a mantra that we just want to do one little simple thing with Moongazer, which is to bring pleasure through beer. So if we can do that as we go on, and if we can do that tonight, that'd be a good thing. So have we all got your beers ready and going and up and running? Good. I can see some there. So before we talk about the beer style, I'll just have a quaff at your beer and you do it. But the 4 key ingredients to beer that we use. The first one that I'll mention and chat to very briefly before I get onto the malt is the ingredient that most brewers actually forget to mention when they're talking about the ingredients. They all talk about hops, they all talk about barley, they all talk about malt, but most brewers forget to mention the most important one, which is actually water. Obviously, it's key because it's the biggest volume within the beer. For every pint of beer that is produced, we will use, and we're very efficient at the brew house, we will use about 5 pints of water to produce it. But key to why water is so important is it will affect the flavour of the beer, it will affect the bitterness of the beer, it affects the fermentation. So normally at this, you'd be in my brewery and I'd pour a pint of water out of our borehole and show you, but you'll have to imagine that that's where we are, because our water all comes from a natural source beneath the brewery. So we actually drill down 190 feet beneath the brewery, and we're very lucky because the brewery's situated over a chalk aquifer. Chalk is very good for brewing because you need the salts from the chalk to create flavour. So other great brewing cities are on chalk as well, and we're very lucky that in Norfolk we are too. The other reason that we use a borehole as well as the flavour is it's free. So as I said, it's one of the biggest ingredients, one of the things that we use most. So it's important to us that if we can get that free by extracting it from the land, that's a good help for the brewery. But if I was to take exactly all of our ingredients to another brewer down the road and use their water, the beers would be very, very different. So it is a key ingredient, and so much so it's not something they advertise a lot. But if you've all heard of Coors Light or Coors, the North American lager that you often see the bloke doing his advert on the snowplow or in the mountains, that is no longer brewed in North America. Well, it is, but the UK version is actually brewed at Burton. And when they first actually did that, they transported the water over from America and tested it 241 times en route to brew it in Burton using that water. And it was only a gradual process where they kept adding the salts and stuff, and they were happy with the flavour that they actually changed the water. So it is a very key ingredient. I have to go on about it just because it is an important thing. And for any of you that ever go past places like Bury St Edmunds, where the big Green King brewery is, you'll see lots of big tanks outside the brewery that people assume are for malt or grain or such like. They're actually tanks that are used for water, where they actually create the specific water profile for each of their brands or the different breweries that they buy up and then start brewing at Green King. So if anyone ever asks you a trick question and say, what's the most important ingredient in beer, it certainly is water. And like I say, it makes a massive difference to what we do. But so getting back to the IPA, if everyone's have a taste, you probably all have heard the tale where IPA comes from. It's India Pale Ale. So it comes from the times when we were India was a colony of the UK, and there's a kind of a bit of a myth as to the stories behind IPA, and it's kind of built up over the years, and it's kind of half true and half untrue. But lots of people, if you say to them, well, where does IPA come from? They say that well, it's in India Pale Ale, and it's the beer that the troops used to drink in India, and it's incredibly hoppy because they put the hops in to make the beer last longer in the journey. Here's some hops for you that I prepared earlier. We use whole leaf hops at Norfolk Brewhouse. So basically, the hops are it's a leaf. It's come from a hop vine with a B, not vine with a V. It's basically a flower, and within that flower, again, if you're at the brewery, you'd all be handed a leaf, and you'd be rubbing these on to get the thing. But basically, what we get from this is oils. So in here is lots of lupulloids and lots of oil holding ingredients, which basically gives the beer the bitterness, and it gives the beer the flavour and the aroma. But one of the other things that the hops do is it's actually first used in beer for sterilising, so it's a preservative. So the hoppier the beer, the more sterile and protected that would be. So the plan really was around, if you taste this Whiteface, you'll get quite a sharp crispness to it, quite a dryness to it, and then quite a lot of hoppy flavour, hopefully. A little bit of aroma there as well, but basically that sharpness and that tartness is coming from the amount of hops that go into an IPA. Now, the hops were put in to, like I say, to help sterilise the hops on the journey, but all beer had hops in those days. But the theory was that the more hops you put in, the more sterile that would be for the 5 weeks, 6 weeks shipping. Now, like I say, there's a half truth in that. The other truth is that actually they increase the alcohol content of the beer. Because the stronger the alcohol, obviously, it's going to be more protected. Because you've got to remember, in those days, it's in just oak wooden barrels. It's not in refrigeration. It's just going through in the heat of the sea crossing. So the beers were made stronger, and they added more hops. So it became a strong, hoppy ale. I was just answering a quick question on there. Someone's just asking, did we buy the brewery because of the water source, or we were just lucky? Bit of both, really. We knew we could have a borehole. We didn't actually know it was over the chalk escarpment that it was. It was only when they started coming to place the water that's what they told us that would be over the escarpment, because it just skirts in the North Sea into our brewery and then out towards Great Yarmouth. We're in North Norfolk. So a little bit of luck. Had we been a quarter of a mile further inland, we wouldn't have had the quality of the water we've got. One of the sad things was when we first opened, I said that the water borehole is 190 feet deep. Originally it was 165 foot deep, but a week and a half into brewing, we actually had what they call a borehole collapse, and we had a fissure in the chalk, which was just drawing down sand. So my lovely clear water was milky white for about a week. And I kept phoning up the company saying, what can I do? I can't brew. And we just got started. And they were like, keep going, that'll clear. That's what normally happens. And sadly it didn't, so they had to re-drill it. So having just got started, it was, we were then closed for 2 weeks and then started up again. But touch wood, all is good now. And just a quick follow-up question on that one. Someone's saying, does extracting the water come free? So yes, it is free. We can legally take out 20 cubic meters for a borehole without an extraction license. If we were to go over extraction, 20 cubic meters a day, which is an awful lot, we wouldn't. We do that in about a week. So we'd have to grow about 5 times to get to that level. Then you would have to pay, or what some brewers have done is then they just drill another borehole and use that sort of 50 yards away, because then that doesn't count as a separate extraction. So maybe if we grow, we'll end up with 4 or 5 boreholes. But yeah, no, the water is free up to 20 cubic meters, but we do have to pay for sending the waste away. So although it's free from the ground, we have to pay quite a bit to send it away. But like I say, thanks for the question, by the way. So like I say, the beers were sent over. They were stronger, to make them last the journey. They had the hops to make them last the journey. So there is a half truth in that, and that's where people think, oh, that's why it all happened. But actually, there was a palate linked to the palate and linked to the flavour that actually made the beers change. Because I don't know if you've all been out to Cyprus or to Greece or wherever, and you've had drinks. You've had I can't even remember the name of it, a Retsina or white wine, and you've drunk it in the sunshine, and you've had it on the balcony with your wife, and you thought, God, this is bloody gorgeous. I'm going to buy this and take some home. And then you get home and you think it tastes like Domestos or something awful, and you think, oh my God, it's not how I remember it. Or you sat in the Mediterranean eating your tomatoes and think, why don't tomatoes taste like this back at home? And such like that. The answer is they all taste exactly the same. Tomatoes in Cyprus taste the same as tomatoes in Coventry. What changes is your palate, and humidity affects your palate, heat affects your palate. And so what was happening is that they were sending the beer over to the troops, and the troops were saying, it doesn't taste like the beer that we're used to at home. Where's it? Why is it not as hoppy and as flavoursome as the beer that we have at home? So the answer was, it is exactly the same, but the palate's changed. So what they were having to do was overcompensate and add even more hops. So by the time it got to the troops, they'd go, this is the beer that we drink at home. So it's very much a case of adapting the beer and the beer style to get to the flavour and to meet the issues of, like I say, palate and how your taste change and how things change. Just on a couple of questions about the size of the brewery. Normally in a normal year, we're all going to get used to saying that, aren't they? Every time we brew 3,000 pints is our batch size, which is 10 brewers barrels. And normally we would be brewing 5 times a week. So normally we'd be brewing about 15,000 pints a week, which is reasonable size for a micro, but still a very, very small in the scheme of things for lots of breweries across the country, but busy enough for us. And, the next size up is for someone else. Global domination is not something that Rachel and me set out to do. We just like brewing nice beers, having a sustainable team. But like I say, we can do 15,000 pints a week when we're going back in. Quick question going back to the water. I told you water was interesting, but Christine's asking what controls are there to stop any contaminants going back into the aquifer. The answer to that is 190 feet of soil and chalk and time that it takes to get back down there. But we do have to have strict things around the borehole where we can't have any contaminants going in, or we couldn't have oil stored out near the borehole place, or we couldn't put diesel trucks or stuff on it. So we have certain environmental controls that we get checked up on, but ultimately that aquifer is drawing in water from all over the county around us. So it's like I say, it's chalk is a very good filter. Not a lot can get through chalk apart from the pure water itself. So that's why the water that we use is incredibly pure and tested all the time. So so basically IPAs, they were strong to keep them fresh and keep them sterile. They were hoppy to keep them fresh and keep them sterile, but then they were overly hoppy to get, like I say, that over the palate cleansing or palate change that people have to get them to taste like they used to do. So then you could go full circle. So IPAs, when all the troops came home, everyone was like, oh, they then thought the beer was a bit bland when they got over here. And then you get, we've all probably grown up with IPAs in the 70s and 80s and 90s thinking, things like Green King IPA, nothing wrong with it, but it isn't a particularly hoppy beer. It's not a particularly strong beer. So what happened over time and history, why that changed back again, is effectively hops that we talk about here that I showed you on the green hop. They're very, very expensive ingredient. We will pay for an American hop, something like that. We could be paying up to for those hops, or anything between £14 a kilo, but it's a very expensive item. So as soon as accountants get involved in beer, that's the first thing that often goes. So IPAs, they kind of lost that niche of being overly hoppy and being overly strong, and it just became kind of like a bit like, I can't remember what the word is, but like Hoover is known for vacuuming and such like. It just became a bit of a generic term. And it was actually probably the Americans that we have to thank for bringing it back as a true beer style, because as they were trying to develop their own craft brewery market and go through things, they were looking at what could they do that is different from the mainstream. So what can they do that is different from Miller Lite or Budweiser or the big boys that are in America? And they started researching the old in Indian pale ales and looking at what they used to be and how hoppy they used to be and how strong they used to be. And they went back to the true roots of the beer style, and then they kind of reinvented it and reintroduced it as a style that sort of has become incredibly popular as we go through today. In my view, often quite extreme, because a lot of the people, they forgot about the word that we like in brewing, which is called balance, because the stronger the beer, the more hops it can take. But you still need that balance. You need that balance of flavour, so you're not just drawing your cheeks in with the hops. And sometimes I feel it's a personal thing, but some people love it. Some of the beer styles that you get that are branded IPAs or double IPAs are very, very dry and crisp, and literally draw in your mouth because of that dryness and that tartness that the hops bring. But thankfully, that kind of phase, which kind of peaked a couple of years ago, seems to have been given way to softer bitterness and more hop forward beers, but the hops are adding more flavour than bitterness. The way that the hops work, well, I explain that on an IPA, is you'll put hops in at different stages of the boil. So the longer the hop is in the boil, as we're boiling it, the more bitterness that you'll get out of the hop and the less flavour. So if you imagine you're at home and you're cooking some broccoli or some cabbage, if you cook it for 6 or 7 minutes, it's lovely and crisp and you get the flavour that you want from the broccoli or that cabbage. If you leave it in there for half an hour, you'll still get some green looking liquid or vegetables, but the flavour's gone because it's all in the pan. Or in hops case, what happens is the flavour is all going up our chimney because it's evaporating, and you're just keeping the bitterness from it. So the later you put the hops into the boil, the more flavour you get from it and the more aroma you'll get from it and the less bitterness. So the tendency of the last year has been to have softer IPAs, so very, very hoppy. But it's sorry. Look, just notice a question from Barry there. He says, I really like this first beer. It seems smoother and less hoppy than other IPAs, which often have too much citrus or gas for me. So again, that's really just that question of balance. So like I say, it's kind of thankful that the styles come back to where it needs to be and look at a balance, because there's actually no skill in just chucking a load of hops in a pan at the end and saying that's really, really bitter, that's what people like. It is about a balance, and we try to do that with all our beers to give it a flavour profile that, you know, it has a wide appeal. So, you know, it's maybe not as out there as other two, but thank you, Jim, for saying he likes the flavour to it. But it's an interesting way to combine. Another question on my water. John's asking, is the water classed as artesian or do you have to pump it? We have to pump it up, John, on that one. So yes, we have to bring it up to 190 feet to do that. So yes, it doesn't naturally rise. We just do it on demand, and to do that. But just going back to the hops, just an interesting side note really before we move on. Up until this year, really, lots of things changed this year, but hops are in very, very short supply. And even as a microbrewer, I was having to forward contract 2 years worth of hops. So we have to plan what we're going to be brewing in 2 years' time in order to get secure supply of that hop. So very, very difficult even at our scale. And what that tends to do is it's actually made lots of brewers like us use multiple hops within each brew. So the IPA that you're drinking there actually has a mix of 5 different American hops, a couple of the classics like Cascade. So if any of you are familiar with beers like Adnams Ghost Ship, that is a good user of Cascade. And Amarillo is another hop in there, so another classic American hop. But what that basically does is protect us, that if we were unable to get the hop, we would be able to still replicate that beer without it changing too much. So if we would have a single hop variety, so we do actually have a couple of beers which rely heavily on one particular hop, if that hop was not available for or we hadn't contracted it, we would have to change that beer completely, which sadly some Barry saying Ghost Ship is very citrusy. Yeah, that's the Cascade hop. We used a lot of the Cascade on that one. So it's good beer actually, Ghost Ship. But yes, so we have to kind of predict and protect ourselves against the hop market. That's probably all going to change now. But basically, what we were doing as an industry was we were growing too fast. You know, if you imagine when we started in the UK, Rachel and me, 8 years ago, there was just over 1,000 breweries. There's now closer to 2,000 in the space of 8 years, all using more hops. That same demand, that same market change is happening all over the globe. So the demand for hops has jumped incredibly, and they're not grown all over the world. And also they take 3 years to establish. So the market can't just turn itself on to go, we need loads of hops. You have to, the market has to plan. It's very expensive to start hop farm. They're very disease prone. They're very labor intensive still. So it's very hard to get the growers and the beer makers to all stand in sync. So one of the way they've looked at doing that is contracting. But like I say, I should imagine there's awful lots of brewers with lots of contracts this year that they're just not going to use all the hops because they're just not brewing to the same extent. But they do last. A quick question on hops. Neil is asking, do hops keep on the premises or do you have them stockpiled? Basically, we keep what we need on the premises for about 2 weeks, Neil. The rest of them, because we contract them, they're held at the hop merchants in Worcestershire, and then we just cool them off as we need them. But basically, they're kept dry frozen to keep them fresh, and then they're all vac packed, and then we just cool them off as we need one. But the larger brewers will have their own storage. The larger brewers will actually negotiate directly with the hop growers and the hop farmers to get those. Thomas is just saying, if there's such a big demand, is there any reason why we can't up the ante? Money is the answer to that, Thomas. It's about £250,000 to do 50 acres of hops to get them established, to get them going. And it's a risky hop because, like I say, it's very, although it's a wild plant and it grows in the wild, it's very water required. It needs lots of water, but it needs to be free drained. It doesn't like sitting in the water. It is prone to drought. It's prone to mildew and lots of other diseases. So part of the reason why the demand is struggling at the moment is a couple of years ago there's a drought in America, there was mildew in Eastern Europe, so it is a very vulnerable hop. So although on the one hand you can say to the growers you've got certain demand, so you've got that, they're taking a risk as well. But there are lots of good UK initiatives there's a UK Hop Association that is trying to encourage more and more growth in the UK. We're trying to grow much more flavoursome hops in the UK as well. So, there's good positive signs, but it's not all that easy. And just because Thomas mentions Kent as a growing area, there's another myth that will knock on the head now, is that everyone assumes it's because of the climate in Kent and the climate in the Black Country why hops were grown there. It's not at all. It's all down to workforce. So one of the things with hops is they will always mature for the same 2 weeks in September. So that's one of the other reasons why it's struggled to grow, because you need that drying capacity to dry them. But basically what happened in Kent is all the factories closed down in London for their 2-week holiday in September, and the workers would go into Kent for their holiday and pick the hops. So they'd be paid on holiday to pick the hops. And similarly in the Midlands, the Black Country factories would all close down for their 2-week shutdown, and the workers would go off and pick the hops. So the growers had a ready-made workforce that they could pick the hops with. So that's why they were kind of in the centre of conurbations where manufacturers just close to manufacturing. So, but yeah, we will see. So, if I went out for a drink of Steve's asking if I went out for a drink of Moongazer, what would my favourite alternative be? I do like Ghost Ship. That's one that I've mentioned before. I like to try different beers. I like to try different things that I see. But of the drinks that you see sort of nationally, as it were, yeah, I think I'd probably pick Ghost Ship as one. My other favourite local Norfolk brewers is a brewer called Grain. They do a lovely beer called 316. But yeah, no, I quite like to try different things. Peter McBride is asking, why is it called Whiteface? Okay, this is quite an interesting story, but for those of you that bought the 12-pack, you'll see there's lots of strange names. This is like Jigfoot, there's Jumper, there's Nibbler. So Moongazer, the brewery is named Moongazer Ales. Moongazer is the hare that you see in the logo, or you see behind me actually. So where the brewery is based, it's in the rural North Norfolk. It's in an old converted barn, and the fields around the barn has got hares. And Rachel and myself are very big fans of hares. They're kind of iconic for Norfolk. They kind of have a stronghold in Norfolk and very, very much liked. And they do stare at the moon. They only stare at a full moon. They actually stare, unlike our logo with the ears are up, they stare with their ears dropped back. So you may have seen lots of sculptures and things in shops or places where they say the Moongazer hare. And generally it's one of those things. No one knows why they only stare at the full moon, whether it is just the brightness that they see, whether it's the magnetic field that they see, but they will literally, like rabbits will stare at headlight on a full moon, the hares will stare at the moon. So we're named after the hares. And then if you'd like to Google hare names Middle England, there is a poem from Middle England with the name of 77 colloquial names for hares that people did. And it's actually a hunter's poem. And the idea was that if the hunter saw a hare and he could recite the poem, if he got the name of the hare that he was looking at or chasing, the hare would surrender to him. So they'd be reciting this poem really, really quickly in the hope that he was called Whiteface or Scoundrel or Jigfoot, and then hope that he would shoot him, could trap him and catch him. But yeah, so all of the names are named after the hares from this Middle England poem, Middle Earth poem. So quite nice and just something a little colloquial to do. And our lagers are called, one of our lagers is called Stubble Stag, which is the Norfolk name for a hare. So if ever you see a Moongazer beer and it's got a funny name, it will be linked somehow to the hares. Yeah, so that's the name for that. So we have got a bit of trouble on the Whiteface one, actually, where there's a couple of people have thought it's a bit racist, but it hasn't. It has no connotations on that at all. It is literally the name of one of the hares in the poem, because there's lots of talk of hares. So yeah, thank you, Thomas. Sorry about that. That's lesson in culture, but that's what we like to do. Like I say, with the beers on that one. So have we all had enough of the Whiteface and we're ready to move on to another one? I told you I can just keep going on. So you
absolutely, yeah. I would say move on. Absolutely.
So Bouchard. So we'll try a mild. So again, Bouchard, the name is from the same poem. It's actually, if you do research on it, has French origins in the Dark Ages as a family name as well. but where that then transported into it becoming linked to a hare, we've yet to find out. But again, it's quite a nice name. It stands there on its own, and this is a mild. So where you've had the golden beer before, you're now going to get something a little bit darker, a little bit brown. And again, there's a bit of a myth around mild, which part of it is true. I'm just going to have a bit of squash actually because I'm dry. In the milds are often associated, again, for those of you who are my age or a little bit older, you'll often think of milds as very dark beers, low in alcohol, and kind of like the cheap man's beer or the cheapest beer on the bar. I mean, as a student, I grew up with a pint of twos, which in our local was, you know, a half a bitter and half a mild, and that was a cheap way of getting a pint of. Sorry, people now talking about eating jugged hare as a thing. I have no objections to people eating hares whatsoever. So mild as a beer style is coming back in fashion. The Bouchard that we brew, it is an all year round brew that we do. It's a permanent ale that we have in stock. You'll notice those that are drinking it have got the bottle. It's actually 4.9%. So again, quite stronger than you probably traditionally associate with a mild. But the first mild that came out commercially, I mean, they've been brewing it as a style since the late 17th, early 18th century. But the first ones which we had is attributed to is actually a golden beer from Sheffield, and it was the first golden beer. So the history of the drink itself, you know, it's not old man's at all. It's actually the other way around, in that beer used to be aged. So it was quite strong because it would be aged, and it often developed strong malty flavors. Well, I must come on to malt actually in that one. But mild represented what they called a fresh beer. So it hadn't been aged, so it was a lot younger. So it had a fresher taste to it, a fresher feel to it. And they didn't, because it was fresher, going back to what we said earlier about hops being used to keep beer fresh and sterile, because it would be served fresher, they didn't actually have to put as many hops in it to keep it sterile. So it was a very lightly hopped beer. So like I say, it could be amber in colour, it could be golden in colour, it could be dark in colour. And it developed as a style, as a freshness. It actually became the country's most popular beer. And because it didn't have to be aged, it could get stronger. So milds typically were about 6.5% strong. And like I say, it was all. Thank you, Ian, for saying that he quite likes this mild. The nice thing about milds, and unlike the IPA that you've had, which had lots of hoppiness in its flavour coming from the hops, the hops from a mild, the flavour from a mild profile tends to come from the barley, because the hops aren't masking the barley as much. So you, as a brewer, you're using the barley or the malt to create the flavour. So typically most of the malt that we use, try to get that in focus. Oh. That's a standard malt. So if you see the barley growing in the field in golden colour, that one that I've just shown you is the kind of the base malt that we use. Just digress very quickly on the barley that we have. So if you all drive around the countryside and you see barley in the fields and it's golden and it's blowing in the wind there, if as a brewer I was to take that and to try and brew with it, nothing would happen. So I'd kind of put it in my mash tun, which is where I stick all my barley, and then pour hot water on it, and nothing would happen. I wouldn't be able to brew from it. I wouldn't be able to get fermentation from it. What we have to do is go through the malting process. We're very lucky in North Norfolk. We have lots of barley growing. It's one of the world's top growing barley regions. Just won't bore you, but it's because of the terroir. The word I can't say, but the soil conditions and the climate conditions and the sea fret is perfect for growing brewers' barley. But what the maltsters do with it, they take that seed from the field, they basically stick it in a very big dark pan, massive pan. They'll stick hot water on it, and make it moist and put it in the darkness, and that seed thinks, I've got to grow, it's time to germinate. I've got to grow. So to feed that growth, that seed creates sugars and proteins, and it gets ready to grow, and it just chips slightly. And then what the maltster does, it takes away all the moisture and it just dries it out. So it basically puts it into, sends it back to sleep. So it started to grow, it's got all the goodness behind it, and then he stopped it in mid-flow. And what that's basically done is that has created all the sugars in there that I can then use and extract. And basically by adding hot water to that malt now, I will get out a liquid which we call a wort, which is basically a very sugary, it looks like beer, but it just tastes like sugar. So it's that sugar that I can then use in the brewing process, and ultimately the yeast will convert that sugar into alcohol. But we can only do that after it's been malted. What you then get, so if you look at the mild, that's actually not very good planning on that one, but that's called a chocolate malt. So that's basically the same as the malt that I've just shown you there, but in a similar way to coffee roasting. What the maltster does is he just dries that out for longer. He kilns it for longer, and as he kilns it, it colours, it darkens, so it starts to burn. The sugars become non-fermentable sugars in there, so I can then use that to add that to the mild. So when I'm brewing the mild, I won't just use the normal barley. I'll add some of this darker malt, which will add the colour to the beer. But because it's got non-fermentables in there, it's also adding that flavour and that sweetness that you're getting through from the beer. So hopefully you're getting that through. And like I say, what they'll typically do with a mild is you'll use less hops because you want some of that malty flavour to do that you get through. So if that's where the history of mild comes, is how did it become this very weak, very dark, typically beer? And the answer is in 2 world wars, actually. So like I say, going into World War One, typically a mild, which then was the most popular beer in the country, would have been 6.5% ABV. So all the people were drinking it, and the government passed a law which said basically you had to come down to sort of no more than 3.5–4% for 2 reasons. A, because they could then make the barley go further. They could use less barley to grow more beer, because how you make a stronger beer is, as I said to you, we use that to convert sugar. So to make a stronger beer, you use an awful lot more sugar, the starting point. So if you make beers weaker, you're automatically using less grain. And in times of war, you don't want to deprive your public of the beer. You want to keep them in the beer, but you don't want to deprive them of food either. So they wanted, one of the ways that they could make people use less barley was to make the beer weaker. And that also helped in the war effort there. And so that brought the standard strength of beers down across the country. And the same thing happened in World War II, and it was lowered actually down to an even lower threshold, which saw milds come into the 3% of that one. And then that kind of stuck as its beer style ever since, really. There was also tales of, the mild could be the bit that the landlord put all the drip trays into the barrel at the end of the night and create a beer, and that is perfectly true. And it was perfectly legal until the mid to the late 70s, where basically the taxman thought, I'm not sure I'm getting all my tax returns and how can I monitor what I'm doing for the taxes? And that practice was stopped. So it did actually, but it was a truism. They were allowed to do it. It did happen. And the pint of beer that you got one night would be different to the one you got the next night, because it was stuff that they're putting in. But like I say, perfectly legal. Quick question from Glenn. He's saying, have I tried to use any other forms of cereal like sorghum? So basically, we use barley, but like I said, we use barley to capture sugar. So you can brew or distill anything that you can get sugar and starches out of. So something like a lot of the if anyone's tried FS beer or Budweiser, a lot of those will use rice instead of barley because they're a cheaper form. Sorghum is also a gluten-free product, so that's why some people will use that. I'm a bit of a traditionalist, and I've just used barley in that sense. But no, it's perfectly legitimate to try other things, and like I say, people do. And again, from a cost point of view, people like Budweiser will use rice simply because it's a cheaper and more accessible form of sugar than barley can be. But to me, the taste of a good beer comes from the barley, and the starting point is a good barley. But that's just a personal view. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the other beers or trying things. A lot of vodka comes from potatoes, so it's just like it's what you fancy in that sense. So all British hops, all British malt in that mild. The hops we should have actually called it Canterbury Tales, because there's the two different hops we use in there called Pilgrim and one's called Progress. So could have been Pilgrim's Progress. But yeah, like I say, quite a nice beer style, one that's coming back into fashion. And again, if you go to America, you'll get Miles, which is 6.5%, 7.5% strong. To do that. Question from Ken, just on alcohol. Ken's asking, how does one produce non-alcoholic beer? Simple question to that. Most people do it badly, but there's two reasons for that. But there's lots of really good ones coming on the market now. And again, I don't want to be an advert for Adnams because I said I like their Go Ship, but I do actually think their alcohol-free Go Ship is superb. I've tried some other ones. So I won't give you the full scientific answer because it's quite dull, but there's two ways you can do it. The first way you can do it is by brewing a very thin beer. So when I say that we get the sugar from the barley, basically you can brew with not a lot of sugar. So that gives a very thin beer because you start with very little sugar. You still go through the fermentation process, but because you haven't put the flavour and the backbone or the strength behind it in terms of the ingredients going in, it always kind of tastes a bit insipid and a bit watery at the other end. So that's not a particularly popular style. It tends to be a style used by the microbreweries because it's the only thing they can do, but it's not something I will ever do because they just taste crap in my opinion. The other way of doing it is if you look at something like Adnams Go Ship and the Thornbridge beers and a lot of the national ones that you're seeing now, is they will typically now brew that. So Adnams will brew Go Ship as Go Ship, and then they will basically take the alcohol out by reverse osmosis. But like I say, it's a very clever bit of equipment that can do that, and a processor that can do it. But because they've brewed it as the original beer, although they've taken the alcohol content out, they've still got the base flavour there that it's doing. So something that is growing in popularity, and I think it's here to stay. I mean, if you ask me, will I ever do one? No, because I don't think within my equipment and my capabilities, I could do a good one. And it's also not my passion. It's not something that floats my boat. If I wanted to brew soft drinks or non-alcoholic beers, that's what I've done. I wanted to brew beer, and my passion is beer, and so that's what I want to do. Quick question from David.
Our clubs, incidentally, stock in the golf clubs in East Lothian, stock Erdinger.
Yeah,
and it's actually very nice.
Yeah, Erdinger, they're one of the leading people. I mean, in Germany, where Erdinger's brewed in Germany, the non-alcoholic market or the alcohol-free market has been over 10% for some time. It's very, very popular there. And again, Erdinger will use reverse osmosis, so they're brewing it as the original Erding that you'd normally drink, and then taking the alcohol out. So it's a very high quality beer, and that's why I get kind of frustrated, because some people think, oh, why is non-alcoholic beer so expensive? Why is it no more cheap? Why is it not as cheap as lemonade? And it's because, well, they're still using the same ingredients and the same process. Yes, they're saving on the duty that they're having to pay, but it's still quite a big process to do it.
Thank you.
Just picking up on quickly, well, two quick questions. Alan's asking, why does alcohol-free beer give you a serious hangover? I've no idea. I do remember when Caliber came out, and I used to try that. It used to give me a stonking headache, but I've no idea why. But again, if you take,
you must be drinking too much.
Yeah. But again, if you take things like ghost ship and stuff like that, there's nothing, no one adds any chemicals to it or adds anything to it that will do it. It is purely yeast, hops, water and barley. So there's no reason why it should give you any more of a headache. And a quick question from David is saying, is there a particular variety of barley that we select in Norfolk? And it was very remiss of me not saying it, because I usually bang on forever about it, but this is a barley variety called Marisota. And Marisota is, as a barley variety, 65 years old this year, actually, which 55 years old this year, aged it 10 years. It's a particular barley variety which some people might think, what's so good about a barley variety being 55 years old? Most barley varieties will last about 6 to 7 years typically, because then they're trying to modify them so they're more disease resistant or give higher yields or grow shorter or do things. So they'll constantly be superseded. Marisota has survived as a variety for 55 years in its pure form simply because of the brewing industry, because brewers will demand Marisota. So it's only grown in the UK, a lot of it in Norfolk and Suffolk, a lot of it in the southwest. It's a pure variety. It's expensive for the farmers to grow, but the brewers are actually prepared to pay a premium to use it because it brews well, imparts a very strong flavour, but it's a very consistent barley. So when I talk about getting sugars, if you'd come for a brewery tour and I talk about getting sugars out of the barley, that's a very precise science to do that, because if you have to soak it for the right amount of time at the right temperature. So if you soak it at too high a temperature by 1 or 2 degrees, you'll get non-fermentable sugars out, so you won't get the alcohol strength that you like. If you brew it at 1 or 2 degrees too low or for too short a time, you won't get any sugars out or enough sugars out. So again, and a lot of the modern varieties, you have to be very pinpoint and very precise to do that. But they say Marisota, as they call it, the very forgiving malt, because it will give you a very consistent sugar extract. Even if you're a little bit out on times or a little bit out on temperature, it's kind of a safety net, as it were. I know that every time I brew, if I put the same amount in as I should have put in, if I put the right amount in, I'm going to get the same results time after time after time. So it's a very, very popular malt. Like I say, only grown in this country, exported to over 20 countries across the world, because there's brewers around the world that will only use Marisota. So there's brewers in Japan, New Zealand, America, that will demand UK grown malt. That said, it's still only 6% of the UK market. So it's very much the craft beer end of the market. Once, I'll pay a premium per sack of that of £3 or £4 per 25 kilo sack. At my level, that's not going to break the bank. As you grow as a brewer and you get bigger and bigger, that £3 or £4 per 25 kilos becomes significant. So a lot of the large brewers tend to have to migrate away from it, sadly. But it's a backbone of lots of beers, champion beers, and of the last 18 champion beers of Britain, 14 have been brewed with Marisota. So it's not just a myth that it's kind of a good malt. It kind of stands the test of time. So I should have mentioned it earlier, David, but thank you for the question, for reminding me. Just again on malt, Alan Walker saying, do I sell my used malt as animal feed? Yes and no is the answer. When we soak that for an hour and a half to get the sugars out. Once we've completed that, that's called spent grain. So it's of no use to me whatsoever. So for me to dispose of it, it would be classified as food waste. So I would actually have to pay to throw that away. I can't just put it in the bin. I have to dispose of it as food waste and pay for that. So what we do is we have a relationship with a local farmer who's got cattle and chickens, and he will come and collect it from me each day and take it away and use it as feed. So I get a free waste collection service, he gets free feed, and everyone's happy. And each year when I get my turkey from him, he still charges me for it. So even though I've fed them all year, but it's a good service to do. But yeah, most brewers will link up with a local farmer in a similar way. The hops will just compost, because hops, you don't have the same quantity of waste. Not cattle can't eat them because it upsets their digestive system. Pigs can eat them, but the trouble you have with pigs at the moment is because of the supermarkets dominate the market, the pigs' diets, even if they're free range, are very much controlled. So they don't really want them eating lots of different hops from lots of different brewers, because they want their pork sausages to taste the same in Aberdeen as they do in Abergavenny. So the hops, we just compost them on our fields around us. But yeah, the spent grain is all given to a local farmer and fed to his cows. Just reading a question here from Neil, who says, is a notable difference between barley and hops beers? So yeah, I mean, basically the hoppier the sorry, someone just mentioned Bernard Matthews. So yeah, the more hops, the hoppier the beer will be, the more flavoursome it will be. The less hops, the more malt profiles will come out. And just following up from Neil, he's also asking, do I brew beer for casks? Yeah, we do. 80% of our market is the pub market, so that's why this year has been particularly tough for us. Bottles saved us. We do like brewed coming bottles, but yeah, no, our passion is real ale. Our passion is pubs, and it's heartbreaking at the moment to see what they're all going through and what we're having to go through with them. But we will come through it. It will. We've been here long enough as an industry. Hopefully, we'll survive. But it's not a tough. And Peter McBride's just asking what I did before becoming a brewer. So I been in marketing all my life. So just pen pushing, ideas for products, ideas for adverts, marketing campaigns and such like. But predominantly in the pub industry and the brewing industry, which is where my sort of passion was ignited. Someone's just asking if my beers are available in supermarkets. No. So it's I know they're an important part of the business, but they suck the life out of a lot of our industry, and they're necessary evil, and I get that. But it's we were approached once, and we were going to be allowed to make 7p profit per bottle that we were selling. I'd rather stay in bed, to be honest with you, but like I say, there is a place for them. There is a place for people to do it, but no, it's not on our agenda, and it's not something I'd like to do or support. We do support our local co-ops. That's on a very localized basis in Norfolk, and they're incredibly ethical, incredibly fair on the pricing in how they allow us to charge them what we need to charge to make a profit, and it's dictated by what we need and not what they need. So but yeah, if Tesco's or Sainsbury's or anyone ever come calling, it's nope, the door's closed, I'm afraid. So sorry about that if any of you out there work for Tesco's or Sainsbury's. I didn't mean to offend you. Personal thing. So Rick's asking what the difference in taste happens between hard and soft water. So again, I won't go into the science necessarily. Thank you, Jane, for enjoying the mild. Thank you very much. Basically, the water content and the salt contents in like I said earlier, will totally determine the taste, the flavour, the bitterness profile of that beer. So even with different styles that we brew, we will have to sometimes change the salt levels within each beer. So something like our porter, which I think was in some of the packs that went out, we will literally add loads of table salt to that, because you need that in the beer to generate that bitterness profile that you're looking at, but there's a huge amount of alchemy and science in the water balance that you use for each beer. And like I said earlier, it is a massive impact on the flavour and everything that we do on it. But like I say, so yeah, that Sid and Lynn are asking, do I Burtonise the water? So that's the same answer to that. Yes, we do have to add. We add some calcium sulfates and calcium chlorides at different levels for different beers, just to bring the flavour profile to where we need to be. But like I say earlier, that we very fortunate that we've got boreholes, so we've got a very consistent base water. So we're not actually adding very much additional waters to it at all, but we have the benefit of going through chalk to do that. Just that's quite an interesting question. Christine's asking, bottled beers safe way after the best before date? The answer is yes. They literally are that. They are best before date. They're not a use by date. Two things will happen with beer as it ages and it goes. The hop profile that you have, so that IPA, the Whiteface IPA that hopefully a lot of you started with, at the beginning has quite hoppy, quite citrusy. A lot of you were saying lots of good flavours coming out of there. That will actually diminish over time, because what will happen is the malt, the hop flavours will slowly deteriorate within the profile, and then the malt flavours will start to dominate, because the malt flavours are pretty constant. So if I was to brew one of those, if I was to drink that in 2.5 years' time, past the best before date, it would probably have a haze to it, because the proteins would have dropped out, so it will develop a haze. It should be free of infection because it's gone into a clean, sterile bottle. It's got a low pH and it's got the alcohol, does not get infected. But it would just taste like a golden hop, malty beer. But basically the best before dates are kind of how I would like you to enjoy the beer that I have tried to create. But if you enjoyed it or opened it after that, it would still be drinkable. But depends on the strength. The stronger the beer, the better it's gonna keep that. If a beer is over 9% or 10%, I can't remember which one it is, you don't legally have to put a best before date on it, because it will just last like a wine for forever and ever. Don's just asking me, I hope Don's not from HMRC, because he's saying, could I speak about potential tax increases I'm facing? I don't know, Don, if you know how the industry works, but basically the Labour government, I think it was, set up a thing called small brewers tax relief. And what that wanted to do, that wanted to encourage, because the whole industry was dominated globally, not just in the UK, by 4 very big brewers, and basically all the brands and everything was owned by these brewers. They owned lots of the pubs, they owned lots of the route to market, and it was very hard for any brewer to break into the market. So what the government did is say, okay, we'll give small brewers that produce less than 5,000 hectolitres a year 50% off the duty that they pay. So Heineken paid 10% duty, the small brewers would only pay 5% duty, to give them that little step up, to give them the extra income to be able to afford to enter the industry. And it's worked incredibly successfully. That's what's been the boom time for the business, because we've been able to approach the market, we've been able to make some money. And currently this government is looking at changing that and reducing it. So basically that 50% threshold will drop down. They will halve the amount of beer you have to produce before you hit that threshold. So speaking personally, this has been said about in Parliament, so I'm not telling tales out of school, it's on Hansard. But from our brewery in particular, if the tax breaks change in the way that they're saying next year, it will cost us an extra £106,000 next year. So actually what it would mean, we couldn't afford it. We can't do that, because we can't suddenly generate in rural North Norfolk that additional income. So what it would actually do is mean we just shrink as a brewery. It would be better for us to be under the threshold, or the new threshold, than it would be to sit in the middle ground where we would be. So thanks for cheering me up on that, Don. But I hope that answered your question.
Thanks, David, it's Peter. Just looking at the comments coming through, I don't know whether you're getting a chance to see them. A lot of people are saying that they don't normally drink mild, but they could get used to this mild. I don't know whether it's the environment within which we're drinking it. And when I first started drinking, I think I was introduced to Mackeson and mild. I don't even know whether they make Mackeson anymore. But do you find that if this is kind of a milder mild than people might be used to?
I think it's a very nice beer that we brew, but I think a lot of milds. I mean, if we actually do say, especially this isn't meant to be sexist, but if we get female people saying, "I don't like beer, what should I try?" The natural instinct is you think, "Oh, we'll try them on something golden because it's like lager," but actually, what we say is try the mild because there isn't that bitterness there for it, and the complexity of flavors are more like a wine in that it's coming through from malt. But there's a scientific reason why females don't like bitterness of beer as well. If you let me bore you for another moment, but bitterness in nature is often associated with things that are bad for us. So foodstuffs that we forage naturally in the wild that give us stomach upsets will typically taste bitter. So our body, our whole, can't remember the name of it now, but we're genetically set up to think of bitter as bad things. So women are particularly genetically suspect of bitterness because they're the child bearers. They're the people we need to take on the next generation. So they're very susceptible to bitterness. But what happens as you all grow older, as we all grow older, that inbuilt resistance or dislike of bitterness changes because your body then thinks you're old enough to know the difference now. You're old enough to have worked out what you can and you can't eat. So that's when you all suddenly get to the age of 30, 35 and go, God, I quite like this now. So there is a scientific reason behind that. So yeah, females tend to be more susceptible to the bitterness of a beer. But I think milds are just a great. We did a golden mild about 3 years ago, which kind of took that myth of milds have to be dark, and it was literally 100% of Marisota and a very little bit of hop. So probably the most simplest beer that I've ever brewed, and it was a delight. It was just a very, very well balanced. Coming back to that word balance, a very well balanced beer.
That's like an oxymoron, isn't it? A light golden mild.
Yes. Lawrence has just cited you all about the small. Yes, Matt Jackson's probably doing it from the other side of the fence. He's saying small brewers' relief is outdated and needs changing desperately. I totally agree with that. Part of my campaigning has been that yes, it does need changing, and yes, it's not a level playing field. But the way to change it isn't simply moving the cliff edge down a degree. So I think it just needs more reflection and saying, how do we protect the people in the bigger middle ground, and more of a balanced view on it and look at it, because what it's going to do is take away the aspiration of 85% of the market that will have no incentive at all to develop and grow their brewery. But yeah, it's it is a cliff edge that needs changing, but equally, yes, I do sympathise for the brewers that are just over that cliff edge, and how do we help them? But it's about, without getting too political, we just need to look at it in the round and not simply draw a line and go, that's where we can fix it. So yeah, it's a tricky one. Right, next beer. I'm getting told off on the chat line. So the last beer, I told you I was like Ken Dodd, not just keep going. So this one is Norfolk Gale. So this is really to just demonstrate a best bitter style. So for any of you that watch cookery programs, you might know Galton Blackiston, bit of a celebrity chef, superstar Michelin chef up here in Norfolk. So he owns a very nice Michelin-starred restaurant called Morstan Hall, which is about 3 miles from the brewery, which is how we met. And he also owns a very good fish and chip shop in Cromer, which is the other end of the scale, but it is excellent. And he came to us about 2 years ago now and said that he would like to develop his own beer using Norfolk ingredients. And so this is a good good example of a best bitter style. So just a nice amber coloured. So typically UK beers now, or best bitters in the main. So like I talked about Ghost Ship, we've got Woodford's Wherry, Green King IPA. Trying to think, Doom Bar is one of the other national brands. So kind of a good session where you'd go for your 2 or 3 pints, sort of around the 4% mark, and do that. So like I say, typically amber in colour, quite complex in flavours. So on this one, you're kind of going to go get a couple of in between, really, the Whiteface and the Bouchard. So it's not going to be as hoppy as the Bouchard. Should still be the flavour. We put lots of the hops in at the end, so we're not getting any bitterness from them. So we're not looking for bitterness in this beer style. But we're looking for the flavour and the balance. So I'll just try to read the timeline on that one. So yeah, typically just think of the hops in that. So it's got some European hops in, some American hops in. That's got Citra hop in. So a lot of you may have, again, there's a brewery called Oakham Citra, which is a very hoppy, very good beer, very, very solid go-to beer if ever you see it. But again, that hop gives a distinctive style. But coming back to what I said earlier, this is a blend of about 5 hops. So it's something that we're trying to develop, really complex flavors with it, but not hanging our hat on one particular hop or one thing to do it. And again, where does that color come from? So when I talk to you about the chocolate malt that we put in to the mild, there's sort of like 5 or 6 different malts we can get in between these 2 colors. Ooh, don't know how to do that. So this one will use a malt called Amber and one called Crystal 400. So they're not as dark as the chocolate, but they're not as light as the Marisota, which we showed you. Very good from that perspective. And it just gives it that nice sort of amber glow. But really what we're looking from this for being just a very easy drinking, flavoursome, sort of palatable beer. Like I say, not nice and tasty, but something that just isn't veering to one style or the other. It's just a good session, what we call a session ale, although in this PC world, we're not allowed to call them session ales anymore because that encourages irresponsible drinking. But just a good go-to beer is what we're trying to do with that.
No session beer, not allowed to use the word session.
No, you're not allowed to call them session beers anymore. That would be promoting irresponsible drinking. So yeah, but that's what they are. It just means, I want to have 2 or 3 of these, or whatever the session may be. But yeah. Steve James is asking, have I ever thought about brewing a cider? If I had £1 for every time I was asked that question, I wouldn't need to brew at all, because that's people do it. But we would like to do a cider, or we'd like to collaborate with a local cider producer that we've got, which is called Windhill Cider. So what he produces some excellent ciders, and we would like to, in time, we keep talking about it every year, but it would be nice if 2021 was the year, is to sort of work with him on a blend that is uniquely Moongazer, and we could collaborate on it and launch it out to us both. The problem with cider is having the resource, so having the right apples that you can again call on. So similar to what I said about, we have challenges with hops. Cider makers, unless they own their own orchards, which Windhill does, he's got 2,000 trees, struggle with getting the apples and the ones. But yes, I would like to do a cider on that one. But yeah, there's some disagreement going on about whether which of the beers are nice or not. And that's a really nice thing about beer. When I first started this, I used to get really upset when people said I didn't like that. But then I thought, well, actually, I don't like every beer that I taste. And in the UK last year, there was 9,000 different beers, which is staggering. 9,000 just brewed by UK beers. So you're not going to like all 9,000. And it's what you like and what you don't like. So, like I say, one of the big beer trends at the moment is sour beers. So I just can't understand it. My view is sour beers died out 200 years ago because they taste awful. But it's kind of like one of the big trends that's coming back now. and basically that's just a wild fermentation. So people will, whereas we're adding our yeast to ferment the sugars into alcohol, that they're letting nature take its course and seeing what happens, and it's not, and adding bacteria to add that sourness. But people love it, but it's not for me. And like I say, I don't particularly like the hoppiness, beers to be overly hopped. But that's, like I say, that's the beauty of it. We can all enjoy a different beer, we can all enjoy a different style, and we can surprise ourselves occasionally with different ones that we like. So we've got some people liking this one about with the strong flavours. So yeah, but again, just coming back to that earlier question about best before date. So again, the flavours that are coming out of there now, if you tried that beer in 9 months' time, it would just become a more malty experience rather than a hoppy experience. So it does change that we do on that one. But any more questions on the beer styles that we've had that we're going through? We're getting into chats on that one, or anything that I haven't covered. But David picked me up that I hadn't covered Marisota as a barley, but any other questions or chats that you'd like to ask me while you're enjoying this third one? Of all my beers, which is my favourite? Probably one that we haven't tasted here today. We do a beer called Pintail, which is in the pack, which is a lot. I tend to veer towards golden beers myself, so the lighter coloured beers. So Pintail is one we brew. Again, it's predominantly just a golden malt, the Marisota, and it's actually a single New Zealand hop, so quite a very flavoursome hop that it comes through, but it's not got that bitterness, so it's a very soft bitterness. And that's one that we do, which is actually gluten-free. So we actually add a brewer's enzyme to it, so we still brew it with the barley, but we take the gluten out by dropping the proteins out with an enzyme. So that would be my favourite. And then someone's asking which is our best seller, and that would actually be the Pintail or Wild Jigfoot, which is another golden ale. So those two are kind of neck and neck on that one. Someone's just asking, Robert Liddell's asking what yeast we use for our beers. We have an ale yeast that we use for all of our ales, and then we have a lager yeast which we use, but we do use dried yeast. We don't have a proprietary wet yeast, which is our own cultivation. We use a dry yeast for each brew. We will probably go to proprietary yeast, but when I started this business, I'd never brewed before other than in the kitchen sink and a little bit of homebrew, so I didn't want all the hassles and challenges of using a wet yeast, and then we just stuck with the dry yeast as we've gone through. But it's something we would like to develop to do that. So
I know you won various awards for your beers, David. How, when they're judging the beers, and how do they come to the decisions about which beers are best in these, these festivals, etc., etc.? Because it can't just be down to individual taste, or is it?
A bit of both. I mean, the awards I'm most proud of, and we have won over 25 awards now, which is brilliant. But we're part of the Society of Independent Brewers Association, which is a SEBA, and they are judged very much. The judge, they're all judged blind for starters, so people have no idea what they're brewing. Often, where you're judging at festivals or beer festivals, people know which beer they're voting for. So there's always going to be an element of people, if they like a particular beer, or they might like a particular brewery, or they might like a particular person, there's going to be an element of that in there. We're most proud of ones where we know we've got blind tasted, so people are literally just handed jugs of beer on a table, and then they literally have a tick box of 1 to 5 for clarity, 1 to 5 for taste, 1 to 5 for aroma, 1 to 5, certain criteria that they have to meet. And then if they're given a style, if that beer's within a style, well, no, they'll be given parameters of what it's trying to achieve. Because again, one of the things that frustrates you as a brewer, especially when you get these social media judging sites, they'll go, oh, this is crap, it's not got this, it's not got that. And you think, well, how do you know what I was trying to impart? What do you know? How do you know what I want that beer to taste like? Whereas when you go to the Independent Beer Awards, they're given that style, and you choose which one to put it in. So you say, I want that to fit into this criteria. That's what I'm trying for it to be. So they're the ones I'm most proud of, to that one, really. But we're proud of them all. But yeah, it's always nice to get a pat on the back. But the best awards are when when a pub just reorders a barrel of beer because it sells well. I know that sounds like a cliche, but it's just really nice when you get, especially as a small brewer, you get the repeat business, and the people are ringing you saying, can I have your beer, as opposed to you having to chase out there and flog it. So yeah.
One of the beers that you haven't touched on, David, is the winter ales. And that, why are they only ever brewed during the winter? Is it because the taste is wrong in the summer, or what?
Historically, there were strong beers that were brewed and kept for a year and brewed at winter. But where you get winter beers which have lots of spices, can't think of them now, coriander, nutmeg and such like, the history behind that style of beer is that basically, if you go back to 250 years, those ingredients are incredibly expensive. So the reason that all those spices and ingredients come out to the fore for Christmas is because that's the only time that people could afford to use them, and it was a special treat. And I think beer just followed that tradition of saying, well, we'll go that extra mile and we'll do something a bit different for Christmas, and try the winter spices and try the spice things. And also, like I say, traditionally those beers would be aged for longer, so they'd be brewed early and then aged to be enjoyed at Christmas. So it was literally around the festival side of it and development side of it and special occasion. It's a pet hate of mine for people that read my stuff online or see the things that I write. I just get so frustrated now that you get things like Rockin' Rudolph and Pump Clips and things, and beers which more effort has gone into the name of the beer than making it a special beer. I mean, the Winter Porter, which is our dark beer that we do for winter, there's 11 different malts in that. There's coriander, there's orange peel. There's so much care that's gone into creating that recipe, because we want it to be special for winter. We want it to be complex and have those really deep flavors. And yeah, so. Just getting asked for questions.
Sorry, David, I've just had another one pop up on the screen in front of me. Many people are gluten intolerant these days, and then there was number one is a gluten-free beer. How many of your beers are actually gluten-free, or have you thought of making more of them?
We do 5. So the Galton's number one ale is gluten-free. Our Pintail is gluten-free as an ale, and then our Stubble Stag Dew Hopper lagers are gluten-free. Like I say, the way we produce a gluten-free beer, when we actually launched Pintail, and which was our first gluten-free beer, there was a real stigma that you get gluten-free products and they don't taste very nice. So you got gluten-free wafers or gluten-free bakers, and people go, oh, that's awful. It's not the same. So we actually launched it as a beer and didn't tell anyone it was gluten-free. So we just launched it as Pintail. And after about 3 months, we told everyone it was gluten-free. And then the pubs would be ringing up and saying, can we have Pintail? And we'd go, do you mean our gluten-free beer? Oh, no, I don't want anything that's gluten-free. And I go, well, it has been for 3 months. And then it sort of that got over that stigma that people can do it. And like I say, the way that brewers are doing it now is very much through the addition of this enzyme, which the gluten in the beer is in the protein. And proteins are what causes a haze in the beer. So one of the major brewers, and I genuinely can't remember whether it was Carlsberg or Heineken, whoever it was developing this enzyme basically to clear the beer quicker and drop the protein out so the beer stayed clearer. And then in doing that, they realised that, crikey, that makes it gluten-free. So that's where the craft brewers have come along and said, well, I can add that. I'm not particularly adding it to make my beer stay clearer, but I'm adding it to drop the proteins out. So within that, you still get the same flavour and the same beer, because it is the same beer. So it's an expensive process. We literally add 70 ml to each 3,000 pints to create the effect. that 70 ml would scare you if I told you how much it cost me. And then to verify it, it costs us £85 every time to verify that that's what it's done. So it all adds up to do that. But it's not just for celiacs. Gluten is I mean, I myself will try, if I see gluten-free beers now, I will drink them, because it creates that bloated feeling within you. So you can, if you go on the sessions that we're not allowed to talk about, I can drink more gluten-free beers than I can sort of standard beers. So the beers, the gluten-free beers are tending to become very popular with drinkers that aren't necessarily gluten intolerant, because they're kind of clocking onto that as well. But in answer, will more and more beers be gluten-free? I would say within 5 years, up to 30-40% of beers will be gluten-free, because we can all use this clearing agent, and yeah, I think it will be a no-brainer.
A couple more questions for you, David, then, which I'm picking up as we're rolling along here. We've all bought through Beers for Europe. Do you sell straight from the brewery? Can you deliver from the brewery? And the other point was, how far away will you send a cask of beer?
In the first one, we have a very good relationship with Beers of Europe. One of the issues we have as a small brewer is sending stuff out, and the ability to, all of you that very kindly bought the beer tonight, the delivery charge on that was £4.99, and we can get that because Beers of Europe send out 400 cases of beer every single day. For us to try and do it directly, it almost makes the delivery charge to you the same price as the beer. So we've always found that a bit challenging, and also as a small team to then organise the boxes and send them out. So it's something we're constantly juggling with and trying to do more stuff direct from us. But Beers of Europe have been a very good ally to do that with us. So you're not paying a premium to do that. It's actually the opposite. You're getting it cheaper through Beers of Europe than if we were to do it directly on that. In terms of cask, we send them out all over the place. Our primary market is Norfolk and North Suffolk, but our casks have appeared all over the country. One of the issues with casks is you have to get the bugger back again to fill it up again. So, but we can use things called e-casks, where we'll do a one-way fill, and we can send casks to pubs further afield. So yeah, no, that is something that we tend to do. But most of what we do as a market is Norfolk and North Suffolk. Again, maybe naively, we like as a brewery to be able to say we delivered our own beer. So we don't like to do it through third parties or through wholesalers. We like to build that relationship and then that contact with the customers. So we, if it's not me, it's one of the other guys turning up with the beer, and that's how we like it, really. Yes, we can do open days, Peter McBride. Yes, we can. We can't at the moment, funnily enough, but we do like to do it. We like to do it by pre-arrangement, so we can plan. Again, one of the things we worked out very quickly as a brewer is people like to think they can pop up at any time during the day and have a look, which is lovely. It's one of the lovely things, but they will always turn up when you're in the middle of one of the key moments of the brewing process and stuff. So in the early days, we'd welcome everyone in with open arms, but we do now have to kind of do pre-booked appointments. But like I say, at the moment, we're not able to do that, but we will be in 2021.
Has anybody else got any questions they want to ask David while we're before we sort of bring the evening to a close?
I was going to say I've gone on a bit too long, so I'm sorry to have taken up so much of everyone's time. But
you're very welcome, David. It's very good.
Do you brew anything like Guinness?
I do want to do a stout. It's something that we've not yet done, and that's purely because of time more than anything else. One of the things we tried to bring out a special once a month when things were sort of Matt Jackson saying, looking at the website, who's the boss or the wife? You don't need to answer that one, do you? She is. Yeah, it's just pressures of time. Again, being a small brewery, 3,000 pints sounds a lot, but if you take something like our Pintail, we will actually be brewing that every week, because we will be selling 3,000 pints of that every week. So when you think, oh, it'd be nice to get a stout in next week, or it'd be nice to do this, we've actually got 7 fermenters now, but they're not at the moment. But normally they would all be full. So it's having that capacity to then say, how do we introduce that one? Jim Conway saying, which other brewers do I most admire? For getting me involved in brewing, probably Fine Ales, as they're now known, because when I was on holiday several years ago, I went into that brewery, and that's kind of where we were drinking their beer, and that's kind of where the moment came where we thought, wouldn't it be nice to do this? Regionally around here, like I say, Grain Brewery is a great local brewery in Norfolk, and I actually have total respect for someone like Adnams, because I think although they've gone up a gear, they're a very big regional brewer. They have a great head brewer in Fergus. They have a very good ethical approach to business. We're kind of a really good community, the brewing community, but you get to know those that are driven by the passion. And yes, we all want to succeed, and we all got to be commercial. And then you get to know those that are, will do everything it takes for global domination. So, yeah, I kind of, if between Fine Ales and Adnams are two brewers that I look up to and I'd like to respect. So yeah. Ian McWilliams is asking, does the vessel that you drink the beer from make a difference to the taste or the bubbles? Yes to the taste, and yes to the aroma, just simply because on the taste it's the same with the gin explosion that's going on at the moment, and the big bulbous brew glasses and goblets that they've got there. The wider the area that you can get to get that aroma into your nose, it's going to make the beer taste differently. Similarly, on the beers that you're drinking tonight, what I should have said to you is pour them first, leave them 5 minutes, and then drink them, because then you'll get more aroma, because carbon dioxide will mask the aroma. Same as when you get it in the pub, because they're just pouring it through the hand pull. Just let it settle down a bit, let some of that CO2 dissipate, then you'll get the true aroma.
That's one of those bits of advice you should have said at the start of the evening.
I just remembered that. Yeah. So yes, it can make sense.
Don't worry.
That's why if you look at the Belgian brewers, and you get goblets like this, that's from the Great British Beer Festival. That one, we'll kind of do it like that. A lot of the beers and the Belgian brewers will have a beer glass shaped to maximise what they want you to smell on that particular beer, or how you want the aroma. So it's not just a marketing thing where they're trying to say this glass is different to that. It's basically to channel that aroma that they're trying to get to change that experience of drinking the beer. So it does, yeah. So yes, it does make a difference. But a good old pint pot you can't beat in a pub.
Cool.
I'm running out of questions.
Kelly, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I was going to say, it looks as if we're sort of getting towards the end of it. I think going to ask Peter, our president, wherever he is. I can't see his face.
Is he back on?
Is he back in?
Yeah, I'm back in at the moment. Yeah. Well, David, thanks very much for extremely interesting talk. Nice that you covered other subjects besides just the beer as well. A bit of Norfolk history and stuff, and very interesting. I'm all sure we've all really enjoyed it. The beers are very, very nice. I've had about 6 of them up to now. And they are, I've not had a bad one yet, actually. They're all very, very nice. So thanks very, very much. I'm sure you've all enjoyed it. Can you all show your appreciation in the usual way, please, guys? Thanks, David. Thanks very much. Right. Next, just a little advert. Next week, we've got a special meeting, so we won't have a Connects meeting next week. We'll have the special meeting on Wednesday, where all the board members will be updating you with what they're doing at the moment. And then the next Connects meeting will be the 23rd, which will be the Christmas Carol night, with a fantastic choir and orchestra. We had a practice with them last night, and you just would not tell that they were all playing at home separately. It was absolutely fantastic. So you've got a really great night to look forward to on the 23rd, and look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks very much, guys, for coming on. Thank you, guys.
Well done.
Yes, guys.
Well done.
Good night.
Yeah, well done.
Well done.
Excellent.
I'll drive it now.
Driving afterwards.
Today, what I want to do
Thanks to all you guys behind the scenes.
into the world of the Chinese kitchen, where rules, ingredients,
There we
and
go.
techniques are possibly very different to what you're doing. Just please come forward so I can show you some of my
Mute
favorite
everyone.
dishes. This masterclass starts with 2 minutes.